Hey y'all, so this week's review is on the Landyachtz Small Blind. I've been skating this deck for the last few weeks and I'm finally stoked to bring you a review. So a bit of a sponsorship disclaimer, I am sponsored by Landyachtz. They did send me this deck for free, so I didn't pay full price for it. However, I will be unbiased in the review and I'll tell you both the good bits and bad bits of this board. Big deal for me getting the sponsorship was being able to still be unbiased in my reviews. So thanks Landyachtz for the board, and yeah, let's get into it. So first talk about the specs of this board. So it's about 29.5 inches tall, 9.25 inches at its widest, about 8 inches here and about 7 inches here, and the same in the back. It's about 8 inches here and about 6 inches at the complete rear. For the wheelbase, it has both a 20-inch wheelbase and a 21-inch wheelbase. Construction, it has 9 plies of maple sandwiched between carbon fiber. So before we get into the actual review, I have a little interview with Dexter. He was kind enough to answer some questions for me. But who is Dexter Manning? So Dexter is the rider who designed this board. He's been a team rider at Landyachtz for a couple of years now, I think several. And his first pro model was the Landyachtz Gambler. Now, Dexter is a really well-respected member of the community, and he has some of the most balls to the wall raw runs out of anyone. Stuff he puts out is insane, and no one skates like him on open roads. Yeah, if you don't know who Dexter Manning is, you have some research to do and some epic videos to watch. So let's get into the interview. I am going to be paraphrasing, so if you want a word-for-word response, I recommend checking out the article linked in the description. Right, first thing I asked him is why he wanted to design the small blind, and this is what he said. He said that he wanted to design it because during the 2018 season, he was on the world circuit racing with the Gambler, and he sort of felt like the Gambler wasn't up to the task for that sort of performing, and he wanted something built for racing and that would better suit the racing standards of today. So thus came the small blind. I then asked him what design goals did he have for the small blind, and he said he wanted to design it around his feet, so kind of got like his foot placement right, and then the rest of the board naturally sort of fell into place. And you can kind of see that as well, because sort of full width where your feet go, but then everywhere else is sort of minimalistic. Next thing I asked him was what he likes most about the small blind, and he gave a really interesting answer that I will not do justice by paraphrasing, so I recommend you check it out in the article. But roughly what he said was that he just doesn't like the board, but rather the whole setup and how it performs and how it allows him to approach corners and sliding differently, and how like these boards don't sort of break traction at the front as old downhill boards do, but they kind of turn into the slide with the back breaking traction first, which is really interesting. I read the word-for-word response for a more in-depth approach. Right, so I then asked him, what sort of tips do you have for people who want to ride this board? And he said, skate them very fast. These boards aren't designed to be slow, so skate them fast and you get the best performance and feel out of them. Next thing I asked was any tips for someone setting up this board, and this is roughly what he said. He said start by matching the front truck axle width to generally the width of the board. Pay attention to how you ride it, because these boards are going to ride differently than the old style downhill boards, so there's going to be some unlearning you're going to have to do as a rider. And that's basically it. So again, check out the article if you want to see what he said word for word. It's really interesting and worth it. Thanks, Dexter, for taking time out of your day to write a response to my questions. So let's get into the actual review. So first thing I want to talk about is the overall size of the small blind. The small blind is not as small as you think. And by that, I mean that where you actually stand and interact with the board is actually sort of full width, where the other place where your feet is not going to go is sort of minimalistic and sort of minimal. I guess that does lend to the overall small look of the board. If you were to close your eyes, or if you were to just stand on the board and just feel it out, it feels like a big sort of board. It feels full width. It feels just as big as any other board, but because it's minimalistic everywhere else, I guess it does feel a bit smaller. But with that in mind, I will say it's a better board for riders who have a small to medium sort of stance. By that I mean, like, if your stance is narrower than 21 inches, if it's a bit wider, you're going to be forced to stand on where the mounting bits are for the truck in the back, and that can feel quite uncomfortable, and I go over why in the next section. Let's talk about the concave of the deck. I've been really impressed with the concave. It's really simple but also ergonomic and really useful when you're going downhill. So let's start with the front. You have W throughout the whole deck, but the W stops just shy of the front mounting holes and just shy of the back mounting holes. You then at the front have wheel flares. You then at the back have wheel flares as well, but the wheel flares at the back feel like they're slightly steeper than those at the front. Wheel flares start just about where the W ends, and this gives you a sort of pocket that's really useful for pushing on when you're tucking, that's really useful for pushing on when you're doing toe side slides, and that acts as a really great reference point for hillside slides as well. And your foot never really feels lost at the back. You always sort of know where you are, and it's just a really nice feature. And because of that, I also think if you have a wide stance and you have to stand in front of the truck, you're not going to feel very comfortable. Also, the narrow width of the deck kind of lends to that as well. It's not going to be super comfortable to have your feet here. So that's why I say this deck is best for riders with a small to medium sort of stance. But yeah, the concave is super ergonomic, and I didn't really feel the need to add any concave mods, but I did add two things. As you can see, there's a torque block here. This deck doesn't really need a torque block. Your leg is never going to feel lost, and you're going to have great reference points with the flares, the W. But because I have a shorter stance, I wanted to experiment with the torque block just so that I could use it without sort of having to shift my feet, because I had to shift my feet to use the wheel flare at the back here for toe sides and stuff like that. For the most part, it doesn't really need a torque block, but I am enjoying having one there. At the front, I did do a bit of a concave mode, but that's just because of personal preference. I usually have my feet like this, and I felt like because my feet was kind of straight, I wasn't able to use the wheel flare. Because of that, I put a bit of tape here. I layered some tape here, and that kind of gave me some leverage for like toe sides and stuff like that, and that felt really nice. But generally, if you can have your foot like this when you're in tuck, you're not gonna find that to be an issue. My ankle is not that flexible, so it felt kind of awkward to do that. Right, so where do I stand on the small blind? So I have my front foot here with like my big toe in line with the wheels and sort of in line with the kingpin, and Dex told me to do that, and he told me to sit more on top of the front truck. That should give you the best performance, and he was right. I set this up with his recommendation sort of yesterday, and the board, like, it felt like things finally clicked. That's how I also recommend you set it up, by having your foot as far forward as you can with at least like your toe over the front mounting holes or whatever. So yeah, the back I have it sort of here as well. Let's talk about the construction of the small blind. Now, most of Landyacht's board are made in China. I'm talking about the main lineup, your drop cats, your cheese graters, your dinghies, all those boards. And they're of decent quality, depending on the manufacturer you use. Some boards from China can be high quality. Other brands that do manufacture boards in China are Arbor and Pantheon. It's not really them cheaping out, just like in order to keep your boards affordable and keep up with the demands of the market. Some brands have had to make some sacrifices, and it is what it is. However, all the Landyachtz race lineup is made in Canada, and I'm talking about the Small Blind, the El Peligro, and the Obsidian. They're made at the Burley factory in Kimberley, BC, the same place where all the Holotech Landyachtz boards are made. And you can really like tell the difference in quality. I'd swear this is maybe twice or three times as good as my cheese grater. It feels super solid, the finish is amazing, feels smooth, and I'm really happy with it. I feel as though this board could last me a really long time and could stand up to any abuse that I put it through. So I'm happy with that. And yeah, finally, there's no torsional flex. That 9 plies of maple and those 2 layers of carbon fiber really kill any sort of flex that there could be. There's a tiny bit, but that's only if I really force it. So the wheel wells of this board are super deep. They're about 1/4 of an inch deep. So even running like the slalom trucks with really soft bushings, I couldn't get the 77mm tall cheetah hogs to bite. I was getting bite at slower speeds. It was like really trying to dive hard, but it wasn't an actual problem when I was riding and doing downhill stuff. So I appreciate the deep wheel well. How do the different wheelbases compare? So I felt most at home on the 21-inch wheelbase, and I think most people will too. I didn't feel super comfortable on the 20-inch wheelbase, and I haven't seen many people using it, to be honest. Admittedly, I did not experiment with it much, so I'll have to go back to the drawing board with that, but for the most part, the 21-inch wheelbase should work for almost everyone. The only issue is because it's all the way here, you often are gonna mess up your back truck a little bit. For example, this is what the back truck of my Smokies look like. Yeah, they're a bit messed up, but you know, it is what it is. So what I didn't like about the small blind, I didn't really like the rails. The concave is mellow, the rails are a bit sharp, and this didn't really affect me when riding. When I was actually riding, I didn't think about it, and I didn't feel as though it got in the way of my skating. But in the past, boards with rails that are a bit sharper and steeper than this have gotten in the way of my riding. They don't really let me sit hillside as comfortably as I would like. So I think mellower rails might really unlock this board for me, but for the most part, they weren't really an issue. The next is the taper. So if you know me, you know that I really hate taper in a board. But for some reason, this time around, this didn't affect my riding experience. Why I mention it is it might be an issue as well if you maybe stand a bit further back than where I recommend you stand, which is about here. Probably wouldn't be an issue, but I just thought it would be worth mentioning. Is the price of the small blind justified? I'd say when you consider the construction, the finish, and where it's manufactured, 100%, the price of the small blind is justified. However, that statement is incomplete if you don't consider what the competitors make. By competitors, I mean brands like Rocket, Luca, Descent, Pantheon. All those guys offer slalom downhill boards, similar sizes, but they all have super exotic construction. I'm talking about like vertically laminated wood with fiberglass, with carbon, with urethane rails, with foam cores, etc. And when you look at the simple construction of the small blind, you're kind of like, that's it. But that really is a knee-jerk reaction more than anything, because when it comes down to it, the small blind is probably going to last as long as those boards and do everything in a pretty similar way. So I think it ultimately boils down to what you want as a rider and what your tastes and preferences are. But I am happy with this, and I would be happy paying $250 for it. I think it's worth it. I think this board is going to last me a long time. And yeah, what improvements would I like to see on the small blind? I think a big improvement, or not really a big improvement, but something nice would be flush mounting, because that would really allow you to kind of wedge and de-wedge your trucks without having a board that rides too high or too low. Most people who ride slalom boards might wedge their trucks a couple degrees. Like I know some people run 53-23 or 55-17. I'm riding 45-17. So being able to wedge my trucks without really increasing the overall height of the board would be nice. Also, I wasn't getting wheel bites, so being closer to the trucks and closer to the wheels would also be nice. Maybe get the advantages of being closer, you know, a little bit more stability, smoother slide, and all that sort of stuff. What trucks will work well with the small blind? I really recommend you pair this with downhill slalom trucks like the Bear Smokies 2020, Rogue Slaloms, Don't Trip DH Sybins, and etc. Other trucks will be okay on this board, but they're not going to work as well because this deck was built in mind for trucks like that. What truck width should you go for? This deck will work well with trucks between 106 millimeters to sort of 130 millimeters. But you just need to make sure that the combination of or the overall track width of your wheels plus trucks is between 8.4 inches and 8.7 inches. That should give you the best overall sort of performance. What wheels are going to work well with this? Anything under 80 millimeters is probably going to fit well and work well on this board. Who is the Landyachtz Small Blind right for? If you like what I've said in the review, this is a great deck for you. You're going to like it. You're not going to regret it. If you have a small stance, this is going to be a great option. It's really going to work well for you. If you want a traditional sort of maple board with carbon in high quality sort of construction that's going to last you a long time, this is a great option. Who shouldn't get the Landyachtz Small Blind? If you have a really wide stance, this might not be the best width for you. I know some people might suffer with a really wide stance. If you like a board with like a 22-inch wheelbase, it's not going to be right for you. You don't have trucks designed for a slalom board, this might not be the right option for you. And if you want a board with really flat concave, it might not be the option for you. I'm personally really happy with this board. I'm going to be riding it for a long time and really stoked that Landyachtz sent it to me. And yeah, so that's the end of the review. Next week, or no, sorry, the week after, we shall be reviewing the Powell Peralta Dragon Skins. So yeah, big thanks to my patrons for all the support. And you guys allow me to keep making videos like this. So I really appreciate all the support. And yeah.